how that looks. And then third, we'll talk about setting the tax levy. Tonight is just informational. All of these will be approved and set at our annual meeting in 2 weeks. Next slide, please. So the first objective is to understand the major budget components. Next slide. And so when you see our total budget attached in board documents, board docs, and you see it in the newspaper, these are the funds that are presented to the public, and these are the funds that you'll be approving as part of the annual meeting. Next slide. So first, we're going to focus on funds 10 and 27, and the three big takeaways for these operating funds. First of all, it is a balanced budget, meaning the revenues equal the expenses. The total budget is just shy of 43.9 million, and 73% of that is funded by the revenue limit this year. This chart shows the revenue by category, the first column being last year's actual, and the second column being the budget for this year. You'll notice the big swings are a large decrease to the tax levy and a corresponding large increase to the state sources, which is state aid and categorical grants. So we'll review later the revenue limit, but basically those two offset each other. And this year we have higher state aid, meaning we'll have a lower tax levy. We also have a significant amount of federal resources this year, similar to last year, which is due to the ESSER funding. And then in the other revenue, that amount is quite higher than last year, and that's namely due to the OPEB liquidation, which those funds are being released within the next couple of days here. This pie chart shows the expenses by major category. So when you look at the budget that's in those different buckets that I present to you each time we talk about budget, this is how they are shown in a pie graph. And so you can see salaries and benefits are the majority of what we spend our revenue on, followed by operations, and included in operations are things like our transportation, our substitutes, our technology purchases, our operating referendum, so some really big dollar amounts in our budget. And then the academics, school budgets, and student services are those supplies that go directly to students. The majority of our money that we spend directly towards students is in the form of our staff, so that's reflected under salaries and benefits. So this slide is showing a breakdown of the salaries. You can see the biggest amount of our salaries is spent fulfilling our contracts and our work agreements. We also budget for extra time and overtime above and beyond what's on the work agreement. We have summer workers. We pay out any unused leave. Last year that was quite high due to the FFCRA. That is no longer around this year, which is why the decrease is there. Substitutes, last year we did in-house with permanent subs. This year we're using teachers on call more, so that's the reason for the decrease there. Again, you'll see a corresponding increase in the teachers on call budget, and then mileage. Overall, you can see that this budget increased approximately 1.4 million over last year. Part of that was due to our scheduled increases like CPI and teacher compensation model movement. The other, even bigger part is due to the new ESSER funded positions that are temporary in nature. They're 1 to 2 years in length, and they will end when the ESSER funding ends. The benefits on the next screen is our major categories of benefits are WRS, or the Wisconsin retirement system. If you go back one screen, please. The 403B plan, which is a optional plan our board put into place where participants can receive $1,500 a year in a retirement account. FICA is the taxes. Health insurance had a large increase this year. And then we have dental insurance in our HRA. And next slide, please. And then some other life insurance, long-term disability insurance, and some payments in lieu of benefits. And so together, our benefits increased about $1 million. Some of those are due to the percentage of salaries budgets, and some are due to the increase in health insurance. And I think I have a typo there in the payment in lieu of benefits that I can guarantee you that's not $320,000. But if we go to the next slide, please. So then moving on from salaries and benefits in our operational budget, we have school budgets, which are the building budgets that the principals manage, our co-curricular budgets, and then support for our well-being and CNC programs. And those budgets remained pretty similar to last year. The increase in cost is mainly due to reduced transportation last year. Our academics budget, the first line item is for WIN. We do spend much more than $8,000 on WIN, but last year, the majority of WIN was funded through the operating referendum. And this year's budget, WIN, we are incorporating into Fund 80, which we'll touch on later. Then we have our Common School Fund spending that's correlated with our aid. The grant expenditures, you'll see quite a decrease, and that's because last year, with our first year in the pandemic, we used a lot of our ESSER money for things like PPE. We put those air purifying units in our buildings. And this year we changed our strategy that instead of buying the stuff, we are focusing more on staff to help our students with learning loss, with social emotional needs and things of that nature. Summer school looks like a big decrease, but that's just because I quoted the transportation for summer school in the transportation budget this year. Next slide, please. Instructional services looks like quite a decrease, but that's because more of the instructional service costs are being quoted to referendum this year than they were last year. And then you can see our SBLA and youth options. So again, the total spending in academics truly didn't decrease this much. It's just that it was repurposed to different buckets like the ESSER funding, salaries and benefits, and the operating referendum. Next slide, please. Student services has some slight decreases. This budget is more likely to ebb and flow in the special education based on the needs of some of our students. Next slide, please. So the operations and finance budget, buildings and grounds is typically about $500,000 a year. The long-range capital projects is based off of need. Last year with the building closures, we were able to get some more projects done ahead of schedule. And then this year, there are 3 big projects that we're planning on, which came in slightly under the $500,000. The other thing I'd like to point out is the operating transfer in Fund 46. Last year, that was due to the sale of the AEC building, and this year, that $800,000 is coming from the OPEB liquidation. Next slide, please. Technology does look like quite a decrease, but again, that's similar to the teaching and learning change in that more of the technology spending is getting quoted to the operating referendum this year. Teachers on call, that would be the reverse of the substitute line item in the staffing budget, where that decreased, we see the increase here. And then transportation is per our contract and per the number of routes needed for this year. Next slide, please. And then the final budget has relatively minimal change. Next slide. So when we put all of that together, the revenue and the expenses, it does result in a balanced budget, which means our fund balance would have no change or stay at 9.3 million, which is 22.95% of our operating expenses. We target 15 to 20%, so we have a very healthy fund balance. So now moving on to the next fund. So that was our general operating funds. Next is Fund 39, which all of the revenue in Fund 39 comes from the Fund 39 debt levy. This year, you'll see in a little bit here that I am recommending that we levy an additional 2.4 million above what we levied last year. And this would all go to prepaid debt. And the more debt that we prepay, we save on interest costs in the long run. And more immediately, we get more state aid the following year, which is the situation we're in this year as well. Fund 46, that's our long-range capital project savings account, if you will. The current balance in there is just over 3.5 million. And with the OPEB liquidation, we could add another 800,000 should the board choose to do so. Fund 49 is the proceeds from the referendum debt, and we have just shy of $1.8 million remaining in that fund. And so throughout the remainder of this calendar year, or I'm sorry, this fiscal year, we'll need to analyze what additional needs we may have at Herman and how best to use those remaining funds, because as of right now, all of our commitments have been paid for. Next slide, please. Fund 50 is our food service. They also have a balanced budget, which as of right now is 1.65 million. However, with the food shortages and things that we're experiencing, this budget, in full transparency, may not stay balanced throughout the year. I'll work with Ms. Testing to make sure that we adjust accordingly, but this is one that could be very subject to the market right now and could change. The good news is that we are not charging for meals this year. They're all being reimbursed through federal programming. So all students in the district can eat free this year, breakfast and lunch. And then finally, we have Fund 80, which is our community service fund. Historically, we've levied $20,000 for the parenting place, and we're proposing also levying $500,000 to support the WIN after school program, which would completely cover all of the costs of WIN, and those costs would not come out of the operating budget anymore. And then any additional community ed programming that's done within the district goes into Fund 80. So those are our major budget categories. I can pause if there's any questions, or I can go into step 2.
Are there any questions from the board? James?
It's 1,500. Yep.
What did you ask?
403B. The 403B up years ago. We set it up to cap at $1,500 per employee. The fund balance, you said we were at 22.95.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember conversation years ago where we didn't want to get that number too high.
Mhm.
What is too high?
Um,
Do you remember?
you won't be able to find anybody who'd give you the same answer.
Okay.
It's not a true number, but there's districts easily double what we're at. So I'd say we're totally in a
Okay.
healthy spot.
Okay, that's
Yep.
all I need to know on that. Does anybody else have questions? Otherwise, I got a few more.
Josh? Go ahead, James.
Lady, Colin? On the, just a question that popped up, and I know I came in and had conversation, but the 2.4 million that we're proposing to prepay,
Mhm.
the following year, if we do not have that capability, how is that going to affect our state aid the following year if that number is reduced quite a lot?
Yep. Excellent question. So, levying the additional 2.4 and using it for debt this year will make our state aid increase next year. And then if we don't levy the same, the state aid would come back down. The catch is that there's other things that also affect state aid. So it's kind of plugging a bunch of pieces together. So it may not be a direct correlation, but it would definitely be one of the factors that would cause the state aid to decrease the following year.
But it would be safe to assume that our state, if we drop down to $1 million,
Mhm.
that our state aid, however correlates to 1.4 would drop as well.
Correct. Yep.
Is that a cause for concern? I know you kind of
Yep.
gave me some sort
Yeah.
of an answer, but
Yep. Not if it's managed correctly. So, we don't have to use all 2.4 right away. So we could stagger it so that we didn't create such a cliff. So we could prepay, say, 1 million in this calendar year, 1 million in the next calendar year, so that we spread it out over a 2-year cycle. As we become aware of state budget predictions and updated pupil counts and things, there will be other things that I'll watch also to see what their impact on state aid will be so that we can make those decisions educated. So it definitely would have an impact, but it's not a reason not to do it because there are other variables that we'll manage together.
okay. And then the last thing, the 800,000 that you're talking about possibly putting in the Fund 46.
Mhm.
Would that happen this year as well if we decided to?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So it doesn't have to go into Fund 46. There's really 3 options. We could not use it at all and it gets added to fund balance. The downfall of that is that we don't get state aid on it. But if we're prepaying 2.4 million of debt, that's again one of those decisions that if we let 800,000 roll into fund balance, we prepay debt, they would level each other out. So that's kind of where I was going to. There's lots of different scenarios we could walk through. But so going back to the 800,000, we could add it to fund balance. We could use it in Fund 46, or we could even use it for general operations this year if there's some project or initiative we wanted to do this year. We really have lots of options.
Okay. That's all I have.
Leah, I got one question. One of the slides you had there, I didn't catch the number on it. I didn't have this handy dandy. You were talking about in the operational funds, the welding and CNC
Yeah.
equipment. Does those figures reflect those new lathes that we got?
No.
It does not.
The lathes come out of the capital project budget. The welding and CNC budget is just for the supplies. So their metals and woods and things that they need to do their supplies. They have a type of gas that they use. All of those supplies are pretty expensive, and that's why they have their own budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else have any questions on this before we're good? Go ahead, Leah.
All right, thanks. This part will be pretty quick. So I just kind of wanted to summarize the funds that we just talked about. So funds 10 and 27 are balanced. Fund 39 we'll need to discuss tonight what we want to do as far as if we'd like to levy additional funds to prepay debt. Fund 40, we're sitting in a really healthy spot in that 3.5 million in Fund 46 with the potential to add up to another 800,000. Fund 49, we have about $1.8 million in the Herman referendum left to decide what to do with that. Fund 50, we're keeping a close eye on, and then Fund 80, we're proposing adding the WIN. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just bring light to the fact that funds 10 and 27, they do balance this year. However, we did use some strategies that we haven't used in recent previous years. And so I just wanted to call attention to this to show that these strategies were used and they're 1-year strategies. So planning for next year's budget will have some different challenges and things. So one of the things we did this year is we are proposing moving WIN into Fund 80, which frees up $500,000 in the operating budget. Number 2 is the new positions in staffing that we added this year. We did code to ESSER funding, and that funding will run out eventually. And then the third part is the OPEB liquidation is actually 1.3 million. And I'm recommending putting 800,000 into Fund 46. That's because the remaining 500,000 would be used to help balance the budget for operations. Are there any questions with that slide?
Board members, we good?
May I ask a
Dr. Van
question?
Deuren.
Yes, the OPEB account, when that was originally liquidated, was that closer to 2 million?
Yes, so the account was at 2 million, but we had to pre-fund the balances for those who hadn't retired yet. That equaled about 700,000, which brought the remaining down to 1.3.
Any other questions, board members?
Can you say that again?
Yeah. Our OPEB account at the end of last year was at $2 million. In order to liquidate it, we had to pay out any remaining balances owed, and those equaled about 700,000, leaving the residual 1.3 million that we could liquidate.
Quick question, Leah. So
Yeah.
If you want to go back a slide, Chris. So the strategies we used, how much does that add up to in terms of trying to balance?
I would say between 1.5 and 2 million.
Okay.
With the disclosure being that the ESSER positions, we had already planned out on a lot of those anyways. So maybe 1 to 1.5 would be more realistic.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any more questions, board members? We'll continue
All right.
there, Leah.
Thanks. Okay, so now we're going to get into the tax levy, which I'll talk about the 3 pieces, how we calculate the revenue limit tax levy, and then how some of the things that I proposed just a little while ago would impact the total mill rate. So our total tax levy is really made up of 3 pieces, only one of which being to support general operations, the other 2 being the funding goes directly to debt service and community service and can only be used for those purposes. Next slide. So to look at the revenue limit tax levy, first we need to understand what the revenue limit is. It's the maximum amount imposed by the state that school districts can levy to support our operations. And then that amount is offset by state aid. So the revenue limit formula is a couple pages long, but when you really get to the nuts and bolts of what makes the majority of it, it's your 3-year average pupil count and the funding per pupil. This year, our 3-year average pupil count had no change from last year, and that's because our actual pupil count for 2021 was the exact same as our pupil count from 4 years ago. So the year that dropped off was the same as the year that came on, creating no change in our 3-year average. And then the funding per pupil is determined as part of the state budget. And it was $10,000 last year, and the state budget included no increase or change for this year, meaning it'll stay at $10,000. And so therefore, when you look at the two biggest factors having no change, that in essence is telling us that the bulk of our total revenue for operations has no change. So then we have the revenue limit, we subtract the state aid. State aid, in essence, it's the state's way of equalizing the amount of levy that districts around the state assess to their residents. And this year is the highest state aid that we've had in many, many years at 81%. And that's really twofold. Part of it is for our debt prepayment last year, produced more state aid potential this year. And then also part of the state's biennial budget was intentional to provide more state aids to school districts to reduce or provide some tax relief. The key there is they did not increase the revenue limit also, so our total revenue potential did not change. It's just where we're getting that revenue from changed. Next slide, please. So when you look at state aid, the major variables are prior year spending, which we had really high prior year spending because of that debt prepayment. Equalized property values, which in our district continue to grow. And then the total funding from the state, which that also increased this year. So those three variables combined produced, and I should have disclosed this at the beginning, but all of these are still projections. The final numbers from the state we receive October 15th. So later this week, these will all be solid numbers. Right now, they're still projections. But we are planning on quite a large increase to the state aid this year. And so if we look at this, this graph really tells the whole story. And if you look at each bar, that represents different years. So 21, 22 is furthest to the right, and that's this year. And then the 3 previous years. And sometimes it's easier to kind of visualize these as items. So if you picture them to be, say, a water glass, and the glass is getting bigger each year for the 3 years previous. But then you can see this year, it didn't really increase over last year. That's showing that our total revenue potential didn't really change when we're used to a history of it increasing every year, which makes sense because we have costs that increase every year with CPI and health insurance renewals and things of that nature. So our bar didn't really get much bigger this year, but if you notice the composition of it, it changed quite a bit. So we've been in the 71 to 73% of our revenue limit is made up of state aid. And this year it jumped up to 81%, meaning our tax levy is historically low this year. Are there any questions on this chart before I move on?
Board members?
Okay. So again, going back to the 3 pieces of the levy, the revenue limit, tax levy in red, we just covered, and this will be historically low this year. The debt service levy, I have a proposal that would be adding more to that levy, and same with the community service levy. Next slide, please. And then your levy, your mill rate's a direct correlation from your levy following this formula at the bottom. Next slide, please. And so when we talk about the levy, it's actually easier to talk about it as a mill rate. They're numbers you can kind of wrap your head around, and they also translate into tax bills. Just remember that The blended mill rates that we talk about are a blend over all of the municipalities that we serve. How they impact each individual person will vary. And so, oh, go back. Thank you. So the 2021 mill rate is in the first column going down, and then that's the actual mill rate that we had last year. And then the proposal is in the final column. And what that incorporates is our revenue limit tax levy, which I am recommending that we levy up to the revenue limit or the maximum. And you can see that results in almost a $2.50 decrease from last year. The debt service tax levy, we're required to levy 2.2 million. Last year, we chose to levy 2.75 million. And this year, I am recommending that we do the 2.2 million plus an additional 2.9 million. And that benefit of that is we'll save on future interest costs and we'll receive state aid on those extra dollars next year. And then the final piece is the community service levy, which we are recommending you increase from 20,000 to 520,000 to support that WIN programming. And so the WIN programming, in essence, would have a 36-cent impact on the mill rate to provide that free after-school programming. When you put all of that together, the total tax levy would still have a 57-cent decrease, which is drastic compared to our history. Usually it fluctuates no more than a couple cents. The year we had the construction referendum approved, it went up more like 20 cents, but came right back down the following year. So this is a very nice decrease for our district. That being said, the numbers that I have proposed for the debt service levy and the community service levy are those are kind of a starting point for discussion. If you're comfortable with that, that's fine, but we can definitely move some of those numbers around too, should the board choose. Next slide, please. So this is a graphical representation of the previous slide. You can see the column all the way to the right is the $8.29. That dark blue bar kind of at the top, that's showing your community service levy. So you can see it would increase this year because of WIN. And then the big thing to point out is although we would be levying a lot more for debt service this year, it's because, which is the green, it's because our revenue limit levy is so low this year, which is the red. So what this would do is set up a really healthy cycle for us of being able to prepay debt. We get the bump in state aid so we can levy more for debt the additional year and kind of get in this good rotation. And that's what the district was able to do when we had the Meadowview debt that set us up for such an advantageous position. So that's part of this recommendation too, is looking at the history of what we've done in Sparta, and it's worked really well. Next slide, please. I had just mentioned this, but I'll say it again. The tax relief or impact will differ taxpayer to taxpayer for a multitude of reasons, but the big three are what municipality you live in, what your home value is, and what the change in your home value was from the previous year. Next slide. So we already kind of covered if there were questions in part 1 and 2. Any questions for the levy piece?
Board members, any questions? You have one, James?
You had brought up that there's a balance in the Herman.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were to prepay the debt with that, is that something we would still get state aid on?
Yep.
So would it make sense to do that? And then that 2.4 million that you're proposing to pay against the levy or the debt service as well, you would have more money that you could stretch out over 2 or 3 years, or however far you can go with it.
Definitely you could, yep. You could do all that, yep.
Question.
Go ahead, Dr. Van Duren.
If we did that, would that mean that the 2.4 million we could use throughout the district versus just at Herman, or would that still be just be usable at Herman
It'd be gone.
The
You
two-
paying down the debt.
with the Herman money?
Right.
Right, but the money you wouldn't spend, the 2.4 that you wouldn't spend on the debt, that could be spent anywhere.
If I understood James correctly, we would still save the 2.4 to prepay debt, but we wouldn't do it all in the same year. We'd hold it in a trust and pay it over a couple years so that we didn't have that spike in state aid. We could kind of level it out. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, because when we
Okay.
talked earlier, about the 2.4 million receiving state aid on that, you had mentioned that we, instead of it having to just, it wouldn't be reoccurring.
Yep.
That we could spread that out.
Yep. And the other thing we'll look at when we decide on the exact amount is if we're in secondary or tertiary aid, because secondary aid is funded at a much higher percentage than tertiary. So let's say at 2.1 million, we hit tertiary. I would recommend that we save that 300,000 for the following year because we'd get more return on that. So there's a lot of variables that'll determine the exact amount. But the good news is once we levy it, we have a trust set up with Associated Trust that they hold on to the money for us. And then I work with Baird to determine the exact amount that's most advantageous for us. But it can only be used to prepay debt. We couldn't levy it and use it for a different purpose.
Right.
Yep.
You good, James?
That's it.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Okay. Leah?
That's it for the presentation. I would appreciate having some direction from the board so that I can have the annual meeting packet as reflective of as possible. So if there's any direction or feedback on kind of what was proposed tonight.
Anybody have any input for Leah on what you presented tonight?
I do like James's approach there that he just brought up with holding on to that, and like you said, using it as appropriately in terms of, and instead of just throwing it out there just to get, you know, one lump sum, but actually doing it strategically so we can get something and maximize that benefit back.
Go ahead,
So
James.
are you asking for a kind of a recommendation on the mill rate?
Yeah, if you're ready to do that, that would be wonderful.
For me, I think I would go with the 8.29.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense to me. It gives the taxpayers a little bit of a break. The school district gets a big bump out of it.
I think that's a smart way of doing it. We had a lot of discussion last year about giving the taxpayer a break with what we did, and that makes sense. Eddie, do you have any?
No, I
Comments
would
on
have
it?
to, I would have to agree. I like if that's what we're doing, making that recommendation. I'd like to do that.
Okay, Colin?
Yeah, no, it all looks good. I like the shift of wind to serve the community better there. And James's recommendation to bringing that out, spreading that out, makes a lot of sense to me. And then we're keeping it still relatively close where if we have to go back up in a future year, it's not that volatile or as volatile as it would be. I like that.
I had a quick question.
Go
So
ahead.
with the moving WIN to that different fund and funding it differently than we have in the past, is that something we're going to continue going forward or analyze year to year based on the situation we're in?
I would recommend we continue it going forward. There are some other benefits in addition to the levy there's benefits to our community
Mhm.
in that it will be offered community-wide then. So I've already talked with Holly Church, our WIN coordinator, and Jody, who oversees Holly, regarding the impact of that. So basically, students who attend our parochial schools or are homeschooled, it would really be, and we would still have the age parameters and the enrollment caps, and the controls would still be in place, but it would have a little bit broader of an offering as far as who could be served. The other benefit of it is it's truly, the revenues and expenses are tracked in their own fund, which makes it operate truly more like a program. So I think it's a really positive move. And with the way we've been able to manage the mill rate, we're able to do it without an impact to the taxpayer, which is really cool.
Yeah, my thing is when incorporating it in like we have now, using this new fund, it gives a little more security to the program so that parents aren't going to be having to rely on a referendum or something to fund large portions of the program, and that they can expect this as a year-to-year type of situation.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you for the direction. That sounds really good. I can definitely plan based off of that. And then just a reminder, the exact amounts of the levy between operations and debt service could change a little bit come October 15th when I get my final numbers, but we have more than enough room that I can still balance it to make it equal that 829. The composition might just change a tad between debt service and operations, just so you're aware. Okay.
I'd have to put the comment in there that the charts and the information that you passed out tonight was outstanding.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So, there are no further questions on that. We'll move to B, discussion and possible recommendation regarding a non-recurring operating referendum. Dr. Van Deuren and Leah.
Yeah, I'll take this one to start. So next slide. Operating referendum, it's a little different than a facilities referendum. It is an approval by taxpayers for the district to levy an additional amount outside of the revenue limit, and it is for a designated purpose. Next slide, please. We have been levying $750,000 per year dating back to about 2007. And during that time, we've been very consistent with our purpose as far as staying, providing our technology to students, having that go toward curriculum and learning materials, the after-school programming, and safety and security. Next slide. In technology, we've gone one-to-one to grades 2 since we started this. We also are one-to-one now grades pre-K, K, and 1, which we weren't anticipating before the pandemic, but here we are, and it's worked very well. So all of our grades, pre-K through 12, have that technology. We've also expanded the technology in other areas too. Everything from our HVAC to our business services to nutrition services to all of our record keeping, everything relies on that technology. All of our security cameras, our door opening, we have very few keys anymore. We use the fobs that are all programmable. So our reliance on technology, even in the 5 years that I've been here, has increased significantly.
I'd like to add one more comment to that.
Sure.
When we talk one-to-one program, I think we all probably instantly think of the iPad or the Chromebook, and what you don't see to support a high quality and sustainable program is all of the infrastructure behind the scenes to manage those programs, the software needed to make sure that we have the correct filtering and the proper controls, the ability to automate account setup so that that's a seamless process when students and staff join our district. Those are all things that come with cost too to support the quality one-to-one program.
Yep, as well as capacity in our buildings and elsewhere. The next slide. Our textbooks and resources. Some of this is technology-based, the Schoology, Seesaw. The lockdown browser is a great example of a tool that the teacher can use in the classroom where she can control the screens of the students in the classroom, and she can lock them out of things and open up things, he or she, to aid in instruction. The textbooks, specifically our science, AP courses, English language arts, math, our online platforms, our Schoology and Seesaw are learning management systems, LMS. Our platforms are the programs that deliver the content of instruction, like ISL is math, Mystery Science is elementary science program, and Discovery Education is social studies. And then we still have consumables, right? Elementary math, middle school science. Next slide.
I'm gonna add to this one too.
Oh, okay.
So I think the big thing to note is that since 2007, just like how we grew our one-to-one program from 2 grades to 13 grades, our textbooks and resources, we started at a spot where, and this long predates our current admin team, but we had out-of-date resources in multiple areas. And so not only did we get current, but we're now on a rotation too, so that we do know that we have the most current and quality resources in front of our kids. And then if you were to look back to the first referendum in 2007, a lot of these technology curriculum pieces wouldn't have been there either. So I just wanted to highlight the growth in that area as well.
Thank you. Next slide. The after-school program. We now offer free after-school program to our students in grades 1 through 8. It's been expanded beyond tutoring and homework help where it started. If you go out to any of the schools, you'll see the kids engaged in a lot of active hands-on activities. It's a very well thought out and implemented program. We're continuing to expand the days and hours the program is offered. We've piloted some morning time, especially for our youngers at Southside. We have also extended the program to include pre-K and kindergarten, recognizing that one of the greatest needs in our community for our young families is childcare. And right now, WIN is really the closest thing we offer to childcare to really help families out before and after school. And then we've also extended our program to operate that after school or after hours during summer school to continue to help families out. And I think it's great to note that we have well over 300 students that are actively participating, and we have a waiting list. And as we get employees and build that capacity, we keep adding students. Next slide. In the safety and security department, as it turns out, many of our safety and security items are tied to technology as well. We've installed a ton of security cameras that's been helpful. Our door access system, the buzzer system to control our visitors, and our Raptor system when people come in and come into the office and they check in. We have also upgraded our phone system, which all is voice over internet protocol based. So a lot of changes there also. So next slide. So if WIN is funded through Fund 80, that is going to help. However, given the rise of technology down to pre-K that we didn't anticipate, and the acceleration of our staff's capacity to use our technology and our students' ability to use our technology, we're integrating more of it into the classroom, whether or not the student is learning virtually. It's become ubiquitous tool. So sustaining the one-to-one program district-wide as we move forward, I think one of the things we need to ask is, are the current devices our high school students work on, are they robust enough? Right now, our high school students have Chromebooks. It may be out of our range to look at really expensive high school upgrades, but imagine if each one of our kids had a device like these MacBooks with the capacity to create and store and have multiple things. It just is so much more robust, would be super powerful. We need to continue to stay current on our textbooks and resources. We're at a point, especially with our technology, where we're thinking less about what do we add, and it's more how do we sustain and stay current. And we also look at supporting our safety and operational technology, right? Everything from our security, door badges, HVAC, our business services, student services, everything is going to that electronic platform and to that technology platform. So the question is, and I know we're in a difficult environment right now. This referendum has been in existence for, 14 years, going on 15 years. Should we go to referendum in April? And if we go, do we stay with the 750? Is that enough to meet our changing needs?
Any comments from the board? Go ahead, James.
So will this 750,000 expire this 2021 school year?
Yeah, this is the last year of the last referendum.
And I'm glad that you're bringing this out now.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I'm a little hesitant with the environment and everything that's going on. I'm not sure if this should be, we waited a couple months. That's still plenty of time. Yes, no?
We'll have to look at the timelines to get on the April ballot. I believe it's January.
January. So
Um,
that's why I wanted to bring it up now. So we could delay it a month. But if this is something that we want to be thinking about, I just wanted to get it on your radar as,
If we don't do a referendum, how does these key pieces get funded then?
technology gets put off a little bit. We certainly wouldn't be looking at something like MacBooks for the high school students.
Colin, I can help you. So as we talked about in the last presentation, I do some strategies this year to get a balanced budget. It is likely that we will have the same challenges next year, but maybe not as much strategies at our disposal. So we're already looking at a pretty tight budget for next year. And so if we didn't get this referendum, that goes directly to our operations. That would be an additional 750,000 shortfall we would have. So does it mean that we would cut all technology, or does it mean we'd look somewhere else in the budget to cut? Likely there would be budget cuts, and it would be a joint effort and lots of discussion to figure out where that would be.
I'll go back to Ms. Hauser's famous saying, is there money for that? There's money for all of it. We have this much in the pot. What do you want to spend it on, right? So, yeah, that's the tough part about the budgeting now, is that as we look to next year, we know it's going to be shorter.
James?
Yeah, I would encourage every board member to put together their list of questions and sit down and have a conversation with Leah.
Mhm.
You would get a lot more out of that than in this meeting or the next meeting. Because you have all kinds of time to, sort through, filter through everything. So if we waited a month, everybody take their time, get their questions together, and have a sit down with her. It'll really help.
I think it's a good idea, James. There are concerns, on my part is whether our Madison legislators are going to be changing the system. You've done outstanding work on the strategies and approaching this, but I think probably we need to have a little bit more time to think about it and discuss it. Anybody else have a comment to make? Go ahead.
I just do really quick. I know that when we started buying the new iPads and that we kind of rotate and trade some out, what does our new number look like for this coming year? How many are coming out? So we kind of have that idea for these MacBooks.
No, that's a whole, we don't want to go down the MacBook issue. That was one of the things as we talked about, what happens if the referendum doesn't happen? But that could come from a lot of different places. So again, if you want to come in and sit down, or I can get you that
Okay,
information.
I just was looking for that quick, if we had. a
Heidi,
quick
I can
answer
tell
from
you,
Chris.
we lease all of our one-to-one devices.
Right,
So the cost is steady each year. It's just a lease renewal. So we don't have any up for renewal this year.
okay, that was my question,
that-
so
yeah.
thank you.
Colin, you have any questions or
No.
comments?
No, that makes a lot of sense. We'll
Good.
meet.
I just have two comments. So first one, I'm in agreement with James and Ed. I think right now, hold off, get our questions together. And my second comment is, as somebody who has worked in this district, and I don't mean this to be a negative, okay, guys, so please don't take it this way. When you let technology go and go and go, trust me, as somebody who had to work long hours into the nights to try to keep stuff running, you don't want to be there. There were days where I was here working, and if we had one piece of equipment go down, we were done. I had no equipment for backup. I had nothing. We do not want to get in that situation. So, and when it comes to IT stuff, there is some core equipment that if we lose some core pieces, it grinds a whole lot of stuff to a halt real quick.
I totally agree with you, Josh.
And I'm not saying we're there now. Chris has done an amazing job. So
Amazing,
please
yeah.
don't look at it that way. I'm just saying I've been where we don't want to go, and we do not want to be there.
He's
Yeah.
also done an amazing job kind of scaffolding everything. So
Yep.
I guess my point is that what we're looking to do is really shift that referendum money from going into 4 buckets to going into 1 bucket with that technology that would also serve the safety piece. But it would be the technology focus on safety, because it's really the security cameras, the door buzzers, all the technology pieces that end up being so darn expensive.
I think that that is a very good point. You know, it's critical in this environment that we have our students safe and staff safe with our buildings. And as Leah pointed out, that one-on-one encompasses a lot more than just hardware. So I think that maybe we just put this on the back burner for a month, and we'll go from there. We'll bring it back up later, a month later.
Would you like it back at committee next month, or would you like it to just go straight to the full board next month?
I think that it probably go to the committee as a whole.
Okay.
It's a committee because based off of the questions that we as board members come back with,
Mhm.
maybe include some of that in with that presentation,
Mhm.
because other board members might have brought something forward that somebody else might not have.
Yeah, good point, Josh.
Mhm.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Point C, financial report.
The financials were provided in board docs. Again, you're seeing the activity. The budget is the one that I presented tonight. That is what will be getting presented at the annual meeting, again, with potentially some minor changes come October 15th. And then once we adopt that original budget, you'll start seeing the dashboards as well each month. And like Mr. Rasmussen commented, I appreciate if you come to me with any comments, questions, concerns. I'd love to sit down and have a one-on-one talk with any of you. So thank you.
I have one question there, Leah, as far as the annual meeting. Do we go ahead and print those books out for the public? Are we printing a reasonable amount out, or do we got a whole lot of extra left over?
Historically, we have a lot of extra left over.
I think the taxpayer would appreciate us being a little bit more delicate on that printing. The printing cost is a pretty good expense for an annual meeting. And if they aren't being used, that's money going down the tubies. So just something to consider when we do get to the printer on something like that. Any questions with the finance report? Nope. Okay. Let's go under business and facilities report regarding Meadowview parking lot repaving project. It's on you, Leah, again.
Yep, I'll take this, and I believe we have Lowell virtually also if you have any questions for him. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over some different pieces regarding the Meadowview parking lot, the project scope, the planning process, the project completion and cost, and then looking to the future. So first, looking at the project scope, the parking lot project was actually approved over 2 years ago for $400,000, and it was to cover the front lot at Meadowview. After that approval, some different things happened with budget and timing and construction constraints that we ended up postponing the project. At the time of the original approval, the building was serving 5 grades, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And the flow of the parking lot, at that time, we weren't quite sure how it would work with the new grade configuration. Next slide, please. So when we went into the planning process this past spring, we did involve an engineer, which was point of beginning. And we did that for a couple different reasons, with the different age levels being served there with removing the 4th graders. And with some different traffic flow issues that we had, we wanted to make sure that we reviewed that. We did involve the Monroe County Highway Department because of the exits onto the highway, and then we had district personnel involved. The team reviewed traffic patterns, best practices, and all of that had to be worked within the confines of the highway department, who had some limitations as far as what we could do with the scope of the project. So the conclusion of these meetings was that we designed a parking lot that would flow differently than what had previously been at Meadowview. And the key things that were identified that would make the parking lot different than previously were to remove the bollards that go down the middle of the parking lot, have a designated bus traffic entrance and exit, and this was at the request of the highway department to not have car vehicles and buses merged together. There was a goal to extend the drop-off lane to create more stacking rooms similar to what we have at Herman. We had specific requests for traffic flow for the special education buses so that our students with special needs did not have to cross traffic. And then the final piece is we talked about holding off on paving the section closest to the road, mainly because we were serving that 1 grade level less, and we were trying some new traffic patterns and weren't quite sure if we would need that entire parking lot at the time. Next slide, please. So this summer in June and maybe a little bit into early August, or early July, Matthew is the firm who completed the project for a cost of $348,575. In addition to the work that Matthew did, Fowler and Hammer did concrete work for $35,620. Our internal buildings and grounds team did some landscaping work. Our buildings and grounds team swept residual asphalt off of the older section of parking lot. We also hired a firm to crack fill the section that was not replaced, and that has been completed also. The one thing we're also looking to do is to seal the portion of the parking lot that hasn't been replaced so that it looks more cohesive with the new part. However, the company who does that, the availability wasn't until the spring due to some of the conditions that need to be for it to work appropriately. Next slide, please. So looking to the future, we are still continuing to work through some traffic flow constraints that we've been noticing since redoing the parking lot. And we're continuing to monitor the usage of the entire parking lot. And as we kind of get that feedback through the remainder of the school year, we'll determine if that final section of the front lot, if that'll be needed. And if it is, we would include that when we bid out the back parking lot. So the back parking lot is scheduled to be replaced within the next couple of years here, and we could include it at that time. Are there any questions?
Okay.
I just have one question. So you mentioned with the traffic flow and how the busing and cars were meant to be segregated. I mean, was that a stipulation the county placed on us, and it was a this is what you have to do type of situation?
Yes.
Joy.
Any other questions? The back parking lot, do we got a cost on that?
Not yet.
Do you anticipate it being as much as what the front parking lot?
We will have to just, oh, go ahead, Lowell.
There's a lot of asphalt back there. I would anticipate that being a minimum of 500,000.
Oh, Lord. And the Lowell, with the sealing of the blacktop, it's been proven over time that the sealing saves the blacktop, you know, when they do that. Are we going to be able to have any kind of estimate on how much, you know, when the life of that blacktop is going to have to be replaced, you know, next to the new section?
Well, we're looking at replacing that with the back parking lot at the same time. So this sealing that will buy us the time to get to when we do the back parking lot
Well, is that 3 or 5 years?
easily.
Okay. Any other questions? I think that's good there. We good, Leah? Okay. Discussion and possible recommendation regarding Memorial Field project proposal and the selection of engineer and construction manager. Dr. Van Deuren.
All right. Next slide, please. We had a great crowd on hand for the interviews that include coach representatives from both football and soccer, administrators, community members. It was just a really good group. Next slide. And our firms, everybody who came to us came with experience and came with great qualifications. And Rettler from Stevens Point, ISG from La Crosse, Point of Beginning from Stevens Point, Market and Johnson from La Crosse, and Fowler and Hammer from La Crosse. And those were the totality of submissions that we had. So we did interview all of them. Next slide, please. We went through a process where we listened to all the interviews. We did not discuss the interviews between time. We took a short lunch break, did not discuss the interviews. And at the end of all of them, we started talking, and we were asked to rate how we felt. We had to assign numbers for the team qualifications, the work plan, project fee, and interviews. So there were subcategories under that, you know, kind of how we were feeling about things. So as we look at our engineering firms, this was actually a little bit harder. The ISG, Rettler, and Point of Beginning, Rettler and Point of Beginning were very, very close. ISG's done several stadiums. They haven't done a ton in Wisconsin. I would say most of the Wisconsin stadiums have been done by Rettler and Point of Beginning. They both had examples of great projects. And as you look here, you'll see that the project fee, I want to point that out. That's one where point of beginning came out a lot higher. They were about 80 to 90,000 less than Rutler. However, project work plan came in a little bit higher on Rutler and the interview. So it was point of beginning used to work for Rutler. And so they had a lot of the same philosophy, a lot of the same work ethic, a lot of the same information. We liked them both. So when it came to construction managers, again, Rutler and ISG wanted to be considered for both the engineer and construction manager. We declined that option because the whole point of the construction manager, as we've learned from experience, is that little bit of push-pull with the designer and the construction manager makes for a better project, especially when we're talking on budget, on time, and quality product. So the clear winner overall was Market and Johnson. Just in terms of their interview, their work plan, but all of them were extremely adamant that about a few things. And that was that we need to get started soon. We can't start soon enough, especially when it comes to ordering bleachers. The recommendation was that we get a pre-bid on our grandstand and our press box so that we get that ordered ASAP. They would like to get soil borings going sooner rather than later. So I would say that Market and Johnson and Fowler and Hammer both thought that they could get it done in early August of next year, but that it would be a stretch and it would take like pushing everything, keep things moving. Our RFP went out with a bid date of somewhere in February to early March. And we're looking at moving that back, if we do this, to mid-January for everything except the bleachers. And the other thing that was recommended, and I thought this was a really good recommendation for both the turf field and the grandstand and press box, they recommend potentially interviewing some of the vendors for that, because when you work with them for design. So just some really good.
If I could add,
Yeah.
the bleachers are a 10-month out right
Yes.
now. So when we're looking at the first football game and wanting to have
5th.
occupancy at the end of August. So when we're talking about condensing the timeline, the bleachers are really driving that.
So the long and the short, next slide. The committee recommendations, construction manager, both firms were capable. Market and Johnson was preferred unanimously by the committee members. The owner of the company, Mike Seichter, was not able to be there. However, he did send a really nice little video to say, wish I could be there, appreciate your business. It was just, and the project manager, Mr. Namist, was there. And so that was good. And for the engineers was a less clear cut. At the end of the day, 2 came to the top of the list, and that was Point of Beginning and Rutler. ISG had some creative ideas. There were some wonderings if perhaps those creative ideas might stretch our budget. We did present a budget for the project of 2.8 million, so we stayed well under 3. And Point of Beginning scored the highest, primarily, like I say, due to their charges. Rutler seemed a little more polished, a little more creative. And there were some differences in preference. But at the end of the day, it was one of those, if money were no object, which one would I pick? And then you look at the price difference and go, but money is an object, and both are very, very good. So we were happy recommending both as being very comparable. So that's what we got. So at this juncture,
You gotta have one or the other,
yeah,
that you're bringing as a recommendation. I wasn't at the meeting. Was anybody else there?
No,
Um,
Monday was the only day I couldn't do it.
So at the end of the day, the committee didn't give a specific recommendation. It's hard not to
I would say,
go with the low cost. I mean, it just is.
I would say taking cost out of the equation, it was Rattler
Rattler?
by a tad. Once we put in the cost
It was point of beginning,
point of beginning.
but they were that close.
I mean, I've talked to a couple of the individuals who were at that, and they did say Rattler had a nicer product. I mean, I've seen a few of their stadiums that I've been in. Marshfield is amazing.
It's also a 5 point.
Granted, it's also a budget about 10 times what we had, but
Yeah.
but still, a very nice product. I remember when we went to the game there, I was taking pictures saying, "Hey, we need this. Hey, we need this. Hey, we need this." I just want to remind everyone, we get to do this once.
Mhm.
I can tell you that we
So-
based our RFP off of the 3 favorite football fields of our head coach and athletic director before knowing who did them, and all 3 were Rattler, for what it's worth.
And the rep for Rattler was very, very professional. Knowing that we had been through a few projects, he didn't dumb down the lingo. Very comfortable talking through all of the processes.
What is that difference in cost? That
Like 80, 90,000 at the scoreboard. If it was 10,000, it'd be.
So Rattler is more expensive, is that what you're saying?
Yep.
By $80,000?
Mm-hmm.
But still fits under that 3 million mark.
Yep. Absolutely. If I were doing this for my own property, I would go with Rattler. If I was going for my own property and I was really watching my pennies, I would still feel great about point of beginning.
I mean, I've seen images of both. I mean, we're not going to go wrong either option.
Mm-mm.
And it's not like we're going to get a product here and be like, "Oh my God, what did we do?" But
Scorecard,
Mm-hmm.
that's the engineering, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
$80,000 is $80,000. If Josh, you say the both of these are fine in those companies, go ahead with the lower cost and save the $80,000. Because if something, as we all know, goes wrong, we'll have the $80,000 to fall back on.
I will say, I think one of the most positive things that came out of the interviews was that not one firm had thought we would have any issue with the stormwater. Because the field, actually, they have this layer of stuff and they build the piping and the water removal right into the field. So that really wasn't the technical terminology, but you get the idea.
I kind of have to agree with Josh, though, that we are only doing this once. And both Josh and Dr. Van Deuren have said Rattler, they were more polished. They had just a smidgen slightly better product. And you can see Rattler's work throughout our area. I mean, it still comes in under budget, which is what we're shooting for. And I feel that if we put a little bit more money into it, we're going to be happier with what what the outcome is.
Because kind of building off of that, I mean, my thing is, I want when people drive down the road there, this pops.
Exactly.
Okay?
Herman pops. Let's make this pop. Let's do this right.
You know, and if it means, you know, a little extra money in order to, you know, where, you know, a family from Fort McCoy or somebody thinking of moving into the area, and they see that, that's a decision maker. I mean, that's.
You hate to say it, but it's true.
I know.
It's true.
Like I said, though, I'm going to be happy with whatever we can go with.
Question. Do we have any feedback from previous clients from the two firms, like working with them, timeliness, things like that, that might tip the balance?
Both of the firms have come back with very positive references, positive experience.
I got a question.
Go ahead, James.
If budget-wise, at $80,000 or $90,000 is the difference between having a really high-end scoreboard and a middle-of-the-road
Exactly.
scoreboard. How does that play in?
I'll see what the gridiron can do.
I mean, when you say pop, I mean, what's the pop? Is it the
It's got to
press
be.
box and the bleachers, or is it the great big scoreboard that has replay on it, or?
To me, it would be press box and bleachers.
I think there are also, most of these plans, we're talking about some kind, using the concession stand and building some kind of a plaza around it and having different fencing and making two distinct entrances, or, you know, that are purposeful and really have, it, like you say, the pop, so that when you enter, you get the same experience from
Right.
both ends, and that there's places to like sit and visit, and building the things so that there is some standing room, because we know we have a certain amount of our fan base that really likes to stand and lean
Mhm.
against the fence. You know, if we put some kind of uncomfortable chain link fence up, that's going to make that kind of,
I want to
Not-
drive
not
by
so
and be
cool.
like, man, that's a really cool field. I want to do what I can to go inside. It's not Lambeau Field by any means, but you know what I'm saying? Like, we have so many people coming through our town from Fort McCoy. They bring their families to the different things in town. I want them to drive by and be like, you talk about it yourself. Like, what's Sparta good? Why does Sparta only have to be good? Let's be Sparta great, for Pete's sake. Let's do this. So I'd like to make a recommendation for Rettler and Market and Johnson.
And just kind of go off of this. So when Marshfield finished their field, coaches, like when we go to our football coaches conference, they talk about that and how amazing it looks, nice product. And granted, that was a 10-year blood, sweat, and tears project that they had to put in to get the funds for that. I mean, that was a long time. But I mean, people talk about that,
Mm-hmm.
and I can guarantee that, I mean, probably regardless of which one we pick, we will likely have the nicest field in the conference.
what was it, Holman or Onalaska? Somebody said that Holman's, you're getting out ahead of them, either Holman or Onalaska. So people are already talking, like the word's out that we're getting a stadium, and every firm that we talked to commented on what a nice size project ours was, because there's a lot of districts in this state that are really small. To do a 2,000 seat stadium is a nice project. And I think, and we have, I dare you to find a site that's prettier. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it could just be an absolute gem.
I'm going to second Heidi's motion.
Thanks, Josh.
Can I ask one more question?
Go ahead, James.
So did these people come in with project costs?
They came in with initial budgets, yes.
Do you have those available?
I do, not right on me.
You, so only the construction managers came in with budgets because they're the ones who set the budgets. The engineer designs and is a percentage fee. The construction manager sets the budget and then makes sure that we are held to that budget. Market and Johnson said that they thought this project would be 2.9 million.
They had a
Fowler and
range.
Hammer was at 3.6. And Market and Johnson's numbers were based off of a bid opening for a similar size stadium that they had just completed earlier this week. So their numbers were extremely accurate.
So Market and Johnson was,
Between 2.75 million and 2.9 million.
Yeah, it was-
They had a range.
okay, and then, yeah, that.
Fowler and
that-
Hammer was
that
like
good.
3.5.
I'm mumbling. I was mumbling. I'm fine. Go ahead and call the vote.
Motion made. Eddie, and to send it to the full board, or what? What was the motion?
I just made a recommendation to go
Make a
with Mark and
recommendation
Johnson with Rattler to go to the full board. We'll
to
do
go
it
to the
that way.
full board.
Yep.
Favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Goes to the full board. Next one up, discussion and possible recommendation to purchase a John Deere tractor and snow for snow removal. A brush for snow removal. Mr. Fromm, Mr. Hawk, Ms. Heiser. Go ahead, Leah. I don't know if Lowell's on. Why don't you?
I'm on.
Okay,
I'll take this one again since I can see the slides, and then Wool's here for questions or to fill in any blanks. So for snow removal, that season is coming upon us quickly. We have 4 maintenance workers and 3 custodians who do the bulk of the snow removal. Our other custodians will help with shovels and snow throwers, but regarding with the big snow removal equipment, we have a 7-person team with Lowell as an alternate. And the equipment that we currently have for this team is Meadowview has a John Deere tractor that's identical to the one we're talking about tonight. Herman has a John Deere tractor, again, identical equipment. And they also have a skid steer. There's a skid steer that's shared between the high school and Montessori. And then there's a skid steer at the maintenance shop, which is kind of the backup, and it's used primarily to load salt. It doesn't necessarily have a route that it does. And then we also have 2 plow trucks. So we have one of our 7 people who doesn't have a piece of equipment. And so we're proposing that we add a John Deere tractor. This is already budgeted for in the budget we discussed earlier under capital projects. So it's part of that 435,000. This tractor would be used primarily at Maplewood and Southside to clear the sidewalks and the playground areas. Tractor Central is the company we go through. There are 3 different locations and they each have their own independent pricing. And so you can see the West Salem location had the best pricing. And so our recommendation would be to approve the purchase of the tractor from West Salem. Well, would you like to add anything?
Just that's who we primarily buy we have our wide area mower, John Deere, who we bought through this. And so were the 2 similar, the same John Deere compact tractors, the 1025s at Herman and Meadowview were also purchased through West Salem.
any questions from the board? Lowell, I have a question for you. Replacement parts, you know, we talked quite a bit about, you know, with our HVAC system, you know, keeping our systems, our big systems like this, where we can get parts and so on and so forth, and we don't have to worry about, you know, parts that aren't available. Are these this John Deere tractor you're talking about readily available for repair?
They are, and besides West Salem Tractor Central, we can also get a lot of the serviceable parts directly from the auto parts stores here right in town.
Okay. Second question. Go back to that slide with the equipment on it. We got 2 plow trucks. I mean, you start adding this stuff up, and it. Do we need the equipment that brush for Meadowview, and not be able to use one of these other pieces of equipment?
I'm not sure if this will answer your question exactly, but we have a lot of curves, a lot of curbs, and the plow trucks, especially a dually pickup truck, is limited to as how sharp of a turn they can make and just how they can work around the curbs and the islands and that sort of thing. So the skid steers and the smaller tractors are very helpful to the plow trucks.
Okay, and we talked about the safety involved with loading and unloading these pieces of equipment and going it from one building to another. That's still an issue, correct?
Not with purchasing this John Deere. We basically have John Deere's then at near every site. This last John Deere will be kept at the shop, and then that will go directly to Southside, and this one will also go to Maplewood, but the Herman tractor stays pretty much on site, and so does the Meadowview tractor stays on site.
Where is it stored on the Meadowview?
At the receiving area.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Colin?
I was just gonna ask, are we able to use these for other things outside of snow removal? Like the tractors throughout the seasons between March and November? Or is it strictly all snow removal?
It's not strictly snow removal. The John Deere at Herman is also used for cutting grass, and the skid steers are used during the summer for landscaping.
The different attachments there? Would we have to purchase those for this new one too?
We have the attachments already, except the John Deere we're ordering will have a brush so that can help with snow removal, but we have other attachments that are universal between the 3 tractors.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Josh, you have a comment? I have a recommendation to move this to full board for approval. Or is
Moved.
it budgeted already for
Consent?
And because it's over the 25?
Oh.
So we could make a decision.
So since it's over 20 but under 50, you could put it on consent if you so choose.
How does the board feel with this?
I would move to put it under consent.
I'll second that.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. You got your marching orders? All right.
Thank you.
Moving on. Thank you. Moving on to business learning. Discussion and possible recommendation regarding Start College Now program and early college credit programs. Mr. Russ.
Well, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Very happy to be here again every semester. We bring in Start College Now applications, which are students, juniors and seniors who are interested in going to the technical college during the school day or outside of the school day. An early college credit program, which is when students look to go to the 4-year universities to gain additional credit and gain additional knowledge prior to graduation. New tonight, I'm happy to report that all 3 high schools are represented in the 15 Start College Now classes and the 12 early college credit applications. Sales is now in here, which is outstanding. And I hope that it inspires more students at sales to get their requirements done so they can continue these programs. So tonight, they're represented by SHS, High Point, and Sales. Just because you approve these doesn't mean that all the credits will be granted. They have to fit into schedules. The universities and technical colleges have to have room for them. But these are just ideas that the students would like to do. But the technical college and the four-year universities ultimately have the final say of whether or not they have room or not. So I'm very pleased, and hopefully for your approval, the Start College Now applications and the early college credits.
Any board members' comments? Mr.
I'll second that.
Let me say it again. I make a motion to approve the Start College Now program and early college credit program applications and for this to be placed on consent.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russ. Next order of business, discussion and possible recommendation regarding 2023 Spanish trip to Panama. Ms. Glenn?
Yes. Hi. Thanks for hearing me out tonight.
Good
So
evening.
my name is Mrs. Glant, and I teach Spanish here at the high school. And I am on behalf of the World Language Department requesting to take students on an 8-day trip to Panama in the summer of 2023. Ideally, the trip will take place in June. The exact dates are to be determined within 2 months of the trip, but usually mid to late June is the travel dates. Typically, we take between 18 to 24 students and 3 to 4 chaperones, depending on the number of students that enroll. There is a minimum of 6 enrollments needed for the trip to take place. The students will not miss any school days as the trip is in the summer, and it is available to all students in Spanish levels 2 and above. And the students are responsible for their own financial arrangements for the trip through the EF company. The school does not need to be responsible to collect money for the trip. The company takes care of all of that. The trip is very cost effective. The reason that I chose Panama was that so that many of the families who can't afford a trip to Spain will be able to have an opportunity to give their child a chance to study abroad, with this cost being only $3,000 instead of the typical $5,000 that it costs to go to Spain. So with the 20 months of planning time ahead, that's a minimum of $125 per month that students could pay on a payment plan from now until the time of the trip, which is very cost effective. And the high school students are of an age to be able to work, and most parents typically have their students take a job in order to help pay for the trip, and they can easily earn that with only working approximately 4 hours a month. So overall, 4 hours a week. And so overall, I would like to propose that you allow me to take these kids on this trip to Panama in order to give them real world experience with their classroom learning. And then questions that you might have about it? Yep.
I have a question. So when is this potential Spain trip?
So the Spain trip is going to be happening this next summer because we were supposed to go this summer and it was put off due to COVID and the travel restrictions that were in place and the quarantining that was necessary. So the Spain trip is already all set. The student travelers are paid for. Everybody is ready to leave soon as June happens. So June of 2021
Good.
or 22 is this coming trip.
So do you find that a lot of students take both trips? Are they allowed to take both trips, or do you let them take one or the other?
No, they are allowed to take both trips if they want to. Typically, students don't usually take both trips, and we don't usually have trips back to back. They're every other year, and the one in between is the German trip. However, since my trip was postponed, German trip and my trip are both going this coming summer of 2022. And then my trip that should have happened this summer, then 2 years out, would be the Panama trip, which is why I'm already proposing another trip, even though we're going to Spain, because a lot of kids didn't sign up for the Spain trip because A, they couldn't afford it, and B, we presented it 3 years ago. So I want to get this Panama one out there for those kids who missed on the Spain opportunity before it's too late and before they graduate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions from the board? I've got a question. If this COVID thing raises its head again and cancels, you can't go to Panama. How's that work out? I mean, you've got high school students that are graduating, you know, and it's put off for a year.
So there's two options. If the trip is canceled due to COVID, the EF company will reimburse the students fully their entire cost of their trip, or give them a travel voucher in which they can use to travel somewhere else at a time of their choosing. If the students choose to cancel, they do lose the $500 deposit, and then they would be reimbursed the rest of their cost. But if both trips were to happen in the same year, because we had to push Spain off one more year, but then they would arrange it so that, you know, obviously one trip took place, then we'd be home, and then the other trip would take place, but we're not foreseeing that to be a problem. The trips are currently happening at this time. As long as the students are vaccinated, they can go, and there's not quarantining being required at the moment. That's the plan moving forward, is that this trip is going to happen.
And the last question, supervision, adult supervision. How many adults are usually with the students when they participate in this?
So there's one chaperone per 6 student travelers. So for every 6, we get another chaperone. So if there were 12 students, we would have 2 chaperones. If there's 17 students, we still have 2 chaperones until there's number 18. Then they put on another chaperone. So every 6 is another chaperone.
Thank you.
I have
Is
a couple
there
questions.
any other questions?
Colin?
Colin?
Can you tell us more why you chose EF Educational Tours, that company?
Yeah, I have traveled with them before, and they were really phenomenal. When we took our trip to Ecuador, we did end up having flight cancellations. It was quite a nightmare as we were at the airport trying to leave, and all of a sudden the flights were all canceled, and we ended up having to split our group up and leave on different days. And EF was like right there on the phone immediately, like making arrangements. They got us immediately to a hotel from the airport to get us back, you know, where the kids could be comfortable, rearranged all of our flights, had Miss Anderson go in with one group on a new flight and myself on another. Made all the travel arrangements in New York for us, because we had to do an overnight in New York that was not planned. They were like spot on. They didn't leave us hanging. They didn't leave us in the lurch. I was really impressed, honestly, because it was super stressful, but they were there, and they in no way let us down. So I feel really confident traveling with them. Their policies for COVID are fantastic. I mean, they're really, I think, a really good company that's got the interest of the students at heart. So that's why.
Thank you. That's helpful. I appreciate that.
Yep.
And then I think the only other just comment would be, if it's not on our radar, just thinking of how scholarship opportunities at $3,000, right, still could be a barrier for some folks. How can we help make that less of a barrier?
Yeah, there is like a $200 scholarship available. It's not a ton of money, but that is available to any students who register right away. They're eligible for that $200. And we certainly could do fundraisers if that was something that we felt was important. We could do that. We have done them in the past with Quick Trip, and the kids being able to buy, or their families being able to buy those gift cards where we earn 1% back. And so we could definitely do something like that if we deemed it necessary.
Any other comments? Can we get a recommendation to take before the board?
I'll recommend the approval of, or recommendation of full board for the 2023 Spanish trip to Panama, and for it to be placed on consent.
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Goes before the board.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You.
Next, discussion and possible recommendation regarding Lou Video Technology for PE at Herman. Mr. Chris.
Yep, so we are looking at, this is something that provides an interactive indoor FIED experience for our students. We are looking at doing it in 2 locations in Herman, in the gym and in the multi-purpose room. I'm going to show you a video in a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about, because I know these slides don't really explain what it is, but the video does a pretty good job of that. But this is more than just something for phy ed and exercise. This has built-in curriculum for math, for social studies, for history, and other core subject areas, and it's interactive. So it gets the kids moving, it gets them active, it helps them build their skills in these subject areas. It's also something that's not necessarily just for PE. Depending on gym scheduling, you could bring down a math class and they could practice their math facts with it. You'll see in the video how that would work. But it's something that could be utilized for indoor recess, which is get some of that energy out when they're stuck indoors all day. So it's definitely something that's neat. SPED could use it for some things. Win as well, just depending. It's a standalone system, so there's two separate ones. Herman runs two PE classes simultaneous many times. So this way, both of those classes could use it if they're indoors. So I'm gonna show you that video. My apologies if it's really loud. It is a pretty high energy video. Kind of what we're looking at. So this is a projector system that gets installed in the gym, and then it has cameras that monitor where the balls hit on the wall. I think it's a great tool. They're about $26,000 installed per gym, so around 50 to 60,000 for the two at Herman. I'd have to grab the. Get that up. Yep, so 56,758 is the total turnkey cost, and that includes training for our phy ed instructors and the building staff that would use it. Like I said, it's a standalone system. It comes with the projector, the sound, the lights, the computer. This is like an all-in addition to the technology that's already installed in the gym. It was included in the original technology plan for Herman just as an optional, and we did come in under budget on the technology plan for that building, so this would still fit within the original allocated amount for that building. Any questions?
Any questions, board members?
I have a question. How did you find this?
I actually went to a couple technology vendor presentations. There was one up in Eau Claire where I saw this. There's actually a mobile version of this that you can wheel into any room. It's a little bit more expensive than the and smaller scale, but they had a mobile version of it there, so I actually got to do it and play with it and see it. So it was really neat.
Any other questions, comments, board members?
What's the timeline for this? Would it be ready by the fall?
We would be looking at
Or-
mostly because of what needs to be done in the gym. We're gonna have to get a scissor lift in there. We're gonna have to put boards down on the floors. Our install time would either have to be over Christmas break or winter break, or it would have to be in June. We're gonna try and shoot for winter break. It's gonna depend a lot on supply. Can we get this in stock if we order it? How long is the lead time to get the projectors and the pieces for it? So the vendor seems to think if we can approve it this month that we might be able, that there's a good chance we can install it over winter break.
So then I do have a follow-up. So the other teachers and the other kids find out this is at Herman. How long is it going to take to get to the other buildings?
It definitely is applicable for every building. We did talk about doing as our next after this one would be that mobile unit and split it between Cataract and Southside as a possibility. That one's on a cart. It's not mobile in that I'm a phy ed teacher and I'm going to take it with me every day to a different school. It's more mobile in we'll leave it at Herman or we'll leave it at Southside for a month and then we'll move it to Cataract for a month. Cost was around $30,000 for one mobile setup. So it was about Little bit more expensive for the mobile one, and it is a little bit smaller scale for the mobile one. It's not quite as big on the screen. But yeah, it's definitely an option that we could pursue in the other buildings as well.
And that includes, like you said, all the training for the FIAD teachers, so they know how to utilize the program and all the aspects of it. And then with the mobile unit, that would be the same as well.
Yeah, the mobile unit quote could include training as well. Like I said, we're only talking about Herman here because this is Herman's
Right,
operating
right, yeah.
or Herman's referendum budget for this one. The other one would have to come out of operating, or
Okay.
we can find a grant or something like that. But the only ongoing cost is and they're not required, but if we want to keep purchasing like new curriculum for it, there's an ongoing fee to get like whatever the new apps for it are every year. I think that was around $3,000 to $4,000 a year.
Mhm.
And that would be something that could either come out of a building budget, curriculum, a technology budget, wherever we want to pull it from.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Colin?
Is there warranty for it or service support,
Yep,
especially?
there's service and support for it. I believe it comes with a 1-year warranty on it. Most of the pieces, other than the lighting system and the camera itself, like the projector is like an off-the-shelf Epson projector. It's an expensive Epson projector, but it's something that parts are available for. The PC, there's a PC that comes with it too, and that's more of an off-the-shelf Dell. So we could also source replacements for that after it's out of warranty. There was an extended warranty we could buy for it. I did not get a price for it because typically we don't purchase extended warranties in general on technology unless it's some really obscure piece of equipment that there's no way to service it other than that. We usually self-insure and just take that risk ourselves, and that's paid off well for us in the past.
Just a single question. With the equipment being in the gym, is there going to be protection placed around it for stray volleyballs, basketballs? Because I can tell you when a kid sees something. he wants
Yeah,
to
I
hit
wish
it.
I can pull you up or shoot you an email. This is all enclosed in like a white powder coated metal frame.
Okay.
That's around it, so it is all enclosed up in the ceiling.
Okay.
Leah? With us being under budget with the Herman building, this could come out of the fund that was extra, right?
Absolutely. This would come out of Fund 49, which is those remaining funds for Herman. Yep.
And so I think the recommendation of doing this is it puts us on the mark as far as having a good training for the students there for Herman. I kind of like it myself. It looks like it will be a very different way of training the folks. So, could I have a recommendation? Take it before the board?
I recommend that we take to the full board the Lou video technology as presented for the PE at Herman.
Second.
Motion made, second, go to before the full board. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Good. Leah, seeing how it's gonna go before the full board, and the way Chris was talking about, the backlog and getting it on order, is that gonna be a problem waiting? This is, as far as getting it in the queue, you might say, for getting it on time to meet the winter install?
I don't know how to answer that one. Board policy is it goes to committee and
Right.
then the full board. And with this being over 50,000, it per board policy
Yeah,
policy
yeah.
shouldn't even be on consent. It should go for discussion. So, yeah.
Okay,
So I appreciate the thinking, but following board policy, that would not be possible.
okay, thank you. All right, business personnel. Discussion and possible recommendation regarding a 303/304 leave absent request. Dr. Van Deuren.
We have a new teacher who has not acquired enough FMLA to qualify for the maternity leave. She is due in the spring and is requesting the 12 weeks, you got all of the documentation and board docs. I would recommend that we go ahead and approve this so that she takes the amount of time that she would get if she were to take FMLA. It's not paid. But she would have her job and we would have her when she's comes back in the fall, which would be good for all of us.
Any questions, board members? No questions. I'll look for a recommendation, take before the full board.
I make a recommendation to pull this for the full board for recommendation for the 303, 304 leave of absence request and for this to be placed on consent.
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded, take full to the full board. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Taking it to the full board.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that one.
All those in
Aye.
aye. We're adjourned. Thank